Bezat Hashem, today in Masechet Megillah, we are holding at Yud Amud Aleph, 19a, and we're starting a new Mishnah today. We're going to have today two primary discussions. The first is regarding being in a city during the day that they should read Megillah constitutes being part of that city, we'll see. And the second is a discussion about which parts of the Megillah are mechuyav, you have to read in order to be yotzei the mitzvah. We have four shitot, which we'll get to. There's also a third part, which we'll get to also, that there's certain qualifications for the Megillah to be kosher in its makeup. So before we begin, let's just speak this out outside for a second. We remember there's three types of cities in regards to reading Megillah. We have the two primary types, which are walled cities and unwalled cities. Walled cities you read on the 15th. Unwalled cities read on the 14th. Now, under unwalled cities, we also have another type of city, which is called kfar, or kfarim, which are villages. They're etzem like unwalled cities that should read on the 14th, but the Chachamim gave them a leniency that they could read on the Yom HaKnisa, which means if they're coming into the large city anytime between the 11th and the 14th, they're allowed to read on that day. And we explained because they deliver water and food, and they didn't know how to read the Megillah. They were generally just uneducated farmers. So they would deliver, and on the day they would deliver, someone could read for them in the large city. That was the general rule. What we're going to discuss in this Mishnah is an idea as follows. That what happens if you have a scenario, let's just take one example. There's really two examples, but you have a fellow who really is part of a unwalled city, or a walled city. Let's go the other way. He's part of a walled city. He lives in Yerushalayim, okay? He goes on vacation 3 days before Purim to
Yerushalayim.
Not to Yerushalayim. Means he lives in Yerushalayim. To Tzfat. Thank you. Tzfat. Is Tzfat an unwalled city? I assume it is.
Yeah, it is.
Let's say Miami. It's easier because Miami, I know for sure, is an unwalled city. And you know, there's certain cities in Eretz Yisrael that are actually considered either Sfeikot or walled cities. That's why Yerushalayim is this Vadai walled city. Yeah. There's certain ones that are brought down are Safek, because I don't know Tzfat if it fits the bill. But he goes on vacation to Miami. Okay, so now what happens is he's in Miami on the 14th of Adar, and Miami's keeping Purim on the 14th of Adar. So the question is, does he have the mitzvah to read Megillah along with Miami when they're keeping Adar, or do we say no? You're a walled city person. You're a ben krach. That's what it's called, a walled city person. You have to read on the 15th. So the way that we're going to explain, we'll see the distinction the Gemara makes is, the way to determine if he has to read with them or not, is he going to be there during the day of Purim? The day for them, meaning the day of Purim. Will he be there the 14th by day? If he's there after daybreak on the 14th, he has to read the Megillah with them both at night and by day. Yeah.
And then he goes back on the 15th to...
That's a good question. That's a good question. It's not clear from the Gemara.
No.
It's not clear. It seems that once he's there, his yotzei becomes part of that city. Ben Kfar, Ben Yoma, we're going to see Praz Ben Yoma. I mean, even one day there, in the day, specifically the day, he becomes part of it. It's not clear from the Gemara when he goes back, does he have to read again? That's a good question. I'm not going to pass it, I'm not sure. But the point is, the determinant is there after daybreak of the day, they are reading Megillah. And it goes the other way if you're an unwalled city person on the 15th in Yerushalayim, for example. Let's see the Mishnah. Ben Ir, so it's towards the top of Yud Amud Aleph. Ben Ir shalach lekrach. If you have an unwalled city person who went to a walled city, u ben krach shalach leir, or a walled city person who went to an unwalled city. If he's going to return to his place, we'll see in the Gemara when, but if he's going to, korekim komo, so he reads like his place, means he'll read whatever his original place is, that's how he'll read. But if he's not returning to his original place, which we'll see means before daybreak of the day of the place he's in, korei mahen, so then he reads with the people in his city, meaning the city he's currently in. Asks the Mishnah, second point, how much of the Megillah does a person have to read? Where does he start reading in order to be yotzei the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah? So we have three shitot in the Mishnah, we'll have a fourth in the Gemara. Rabbi Meir Omer Kula. Rabbi Meir says you have to read the whole thing. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Me'ish Yehudi. Rabbi Yehuda says he has to read from Ish Yehudi. Now, Ish Yehudi is the introduction of Mordechai. Right? That's the introduction of Mordechai. That's where he has to begin reading from. Rabbi Yossi Omer me'achar devarim ha'ele. Rabbi Yossi says he has to read from achar devarim ha'ele, which is the introduction of Haman's elevation, when he ascends to power as the second in command. Let's see the Gemara. Amar Rava. Rava says like this: when we say if he intends to return, he doesn't read with the people that he's currently with, and if he doesn't intend to return, he does. Lo shanu ela she'atid lachzor belelei yudalet. So it's only if he intends to return belelei yudalet. Let's say it's a walled city person, a Yerushalayim resident is in Haifa, I don't know, in one of the cities that are not walled, and he intends to return to Yerushalayim belelei yudalet, the evening of the 14th, meaning before daybreak. That turns into the day of the 14th, right? It goes night of the 14th and then day of the 14th. So if he intends to return the night of the 14th, then he will not read with the current location. Rather, he reads when he gets to Yerushalayim back home. But if he does not intend to return to his original city, to Yerushalayim, the 14th at night, korei mahen, meaning if he's waiting there till daybreak of the 14th, he's already considered part of Haifa, and he'll read along with them the night and the day as he is considered a resident there. And the idea here is, as Rashi points this out, is Pruz ben Yoma or Krach ben Yoma is part of that, meaning even if you're there just for the day, meaning even the daylight hours, the day break, that already makes you part of that city. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Minamina, how do I know that this is true? Because in Megillat Esther it says, this is the end of the after the miracle happens, it says, Al-Kena Yehudim ha-Prazim. Therefore, the Jews of unwalled cities, Hayoshvim ba'arei ha-Prazot, who live in unwalled cities. Now, it's a double language. Unwalled cities who live in unwalled cities. So why does it double it? It already says the unwalled city people. Why does it have to write those who live in unwalled cities? So Hakamash Malan, it must be, it's teaching us that Pruz ben Yomu Nikra Pruz, that even if you're not a resident there, but you're only there for one day, emphasis on day, you're already considered part of that unwalled city. That's the emphasis. It's a double language. If you're a resident, you read on the 14th, but also, if you're only there for one day, you're considered also part of that unwalled city. So the Gemara says, Ashkach and Pruz. That would show us that a person who is in an unwalled city for one day is part of it. Mukaf minol. And how do we know it's the same with a walled city? So svaro, it's logical. Midepruz ben yom mokaroi pruz, mukaf ben yom mokaroi mukaf. If an unwalled city, being there one day, you'd be considered part of it, the same would be true for a walled city. There's no logical reason to distinguish between them. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rava ben Kfar. Now this is a unique distinction. Kfar is a village, and as we said, be'etzem, a village is like an unwalled city who should read on the 14th, but they have a leniency, they read earlier. They could. So Rava says like this, Ben Kfar shalach le'ir, if you a villager who goes to the big city, ben kachu ben kach korei mahen, even if he intends to return before daybreak of the 14th, he would still read that night with them. Now why would he read with them at night? Even if, and Rashi learns over here actually, even if he had already read, meaning even if he read already earlier on the 12th, for example, he says, even if he read earlier, he would still read that night with them. Now why? Because really the time for a villager is to read on the 14th. The Chachamim gave him a leniency. You're not in the unwalled city, you're not in the big city on the 14th, so you don't have to. But if you're there anyways, the night of the 14th, that really is the chiyuv, so you should read on that day with them as well. My time, what's the reason? Because really he should read on the 14th like the large cities. The rabbis were lenient on the villagers in order that they should supply water and food to their brothers in the large cities. On the side, the Masarat Hashas changes this actually mipnei, because, as we explained earlier, it's to benefit them. So, they only have this leniency if they are still in their original cities the night of the 14th in the villages. But if they're already in the large cities the night of the 14th, they should read along with them, because really that is their natural halacha. Abai is the kasha from a Braita, because the Braita says something that seems to contradict this psak of Rava. He says, the Braita says like this: Ben krach shalach le'ir. If you have a walled city person who goes to an unwalled city, ben kachu ben kach korekim komo. Regardless, he'll read like his original location. So the Gemara says, Ben krach salka datach Could it possibly mean a walled city person? Regardless, he reads on the 14th. We already said it depends if he's planning to go back before daybreak or not. You can't say regardless he reads like them. Elalav, it must be what's the pshat in the Braita? It means ben kfar. The Braita is talking about a villager. A villager went to a large city. Regardless, he reads along, but it says kimkomo, like his original place. So asks the Gemara, it seems to be, Abaye says to Rava, that regardless, he doesn't read with the unwalled city. He reads like his original place. The Gemara says, that's not a kasha. You already explained this Braita. You're changing words already in the Braita. Really, it says walled city person, and you're saying it's a villager. Well, once you're changing that part of the Braita, Tani korei mahen. So you could also change the end of the Braita that says, regardless, he doesn't read like his original place, rather he reads like the place that he's in. Once you're saying that, that makes sense. That fits with what Rava was saying. All right, let's move on now to the second point here. We said in the Mishnah that there's three shitot where you begin reading the Megillah to be yotzei the mitzvah. We had Rabbi Meir from the whole thing from the beginning. Rabbi Yehuda said from Ish Yodi, from Mordechai's introduction, and we had Rabbi Yossi who says from Haman's elevation. Three shitot. Tanya, the Braita adds a fourth shita. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, mi balayla hahu. So he says actually it begins from balayla hu. Balayla hu we learned is the night Achashverosh couldn't sleep. It's what we look at as the beginning of the nes. That was like the beginning of the change, of the turnover. So the Gemara explains all of these four shitot are really deduced from the same pasuk. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'kulan mikra echad darshu. They all are explained from the same verse. Because the pasuk says at the end of Megillat Esther, it says like this: "Vatichtov Esther HaMalka." It says Esther HaMalka wrote. She wrote over this Megillah. Mordechai Yehudi, it's called Tokef. They wrote over all of the Tokef, the power. Tokef is the might or the acts of power. Fine. So Manda Amar Kula, the one who says, Rabbi Meir who says that you have to read the entirety of it. What is the Tokef, the power, referring to? Tokfo shel Achashverosh. It means the might of Achashverosh. Now where does that begin? In the beginning of the Megillah, where it talks about his might, the wealth that he had, the parties that he made. So you have to begin in the beginning. Umanda Amar Meish Yehudi, and the one who says that you have to read, Rabbi Yehuda who says you have to start reading from Mordechai's elevation, Mordechai's introduction, Tokvo shel Mordechai. So it means the power of Mordechai. You start reading where Mordechai is introduced. It says Ish Yehudi Ayah b'Shoshana Bira, etc. According to Rabbi Yossi, who says you begin reading at the elevation of Haman, it's Tokvo shel Haman. It means the power of Haman. That's where you start reading. And according to the final shita, Rashbi, who says you start reading from Balaylahu, Takvo Shel Nes, it's the power of the miracle, which refers to its inception, which is that night that Achashverosh can't sleep. This is the first explanation of the debate. Rav Huna Amar Mehach. Rav Huna says the debate is actually based on a different verse, because it says Umar Ra'u al Kacha. It's the same context there in the psakim. It says they wrote this over Umar Ra'u, what they saw, al Kacha, about this. This is the pasuk. Umahigi aleihem, and what reached them, what they received. So now each of the shitot is going to explain that the requirement of reading Megillah based on these verses changes depending on their opinion. Manda Amar Kula, again, according to Reb Meir, who says you read the entirety of the Megillah, Mara Achashverosh Nishtamesh Bekelim Shel Beit HaMikdash. That what was seen, what does it mean that Achashverosh used the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, which was at a party in the beginning of the story? Al-Kacha, as the pasuk says about this, like we learned, the whole sugya, Mishum dechashiv shivim shnin velo ifruk. Why did he do that? Because he calculated 70 years, and he determined the Jews were not redeemed, so he wasn't worried that Hashem would punish him anymore. And when it says in the pasuk what reached them, what ended up happening because of that? Dekatal Vashti, that Vashti was killed because of this. Very interesting, is it would appear Vashti's death was, and the Gemara there also implied that the Satan came and danced between them and killed Vashti, is that Vashti's death was a punishment for Achashverosh because he used the kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. Interesting thing. That's all in Reb Meir. Umadam Ish Yehudi. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, says you read from Ish Yehudi, from Mordechai's introduction. So it's like this: Mara'a Mordechai de'ikne beHaman. What did Mordechai see fit that he incited the anger of Haman? Why? Al Kacha. About this. What's this? Deshavin Avshei Avodah Zarah, because Haman made himself into Avodah Zarah. And what ended up reaching them? A miracle occurred because Mordechai held his position, and therefore a miracle happened for the Jews. They were saved. Third opinion, according to Rabbi Yossi, says you read from the elevation of Haman, Mara Haman shenitkaneh b'chol haYehudim. So Mara means, why did Haman see fit to be angry, have hatred towards all the Jews? Al kacha, about this, what is that? Mishum de Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh, because Mordechai wouldn't bow down to him. What ended up happening was, v'talu oto v'et banav ala etz, him and his sons were hung on the tree, on the gallows. And the final shita, according to Rashbi, who says you start reading from the miracle that Achashverosh couldn't sleep that night. Mara Achashverosh lavi et sefer zechronot. That what does it mean? What did Achashverosh see fit to bring out his book of Chronicles to see who had done him a favor? Al kacha. Remember Esther's mind games. Because of this, dezaminte Esther la Haman ba'adei. Because Esther invited Haman to the party with Achashverosh, so he started to think probably they're plotting a assassination. And what ended up reaching them was, what ended up happening, the a miracle occurred. All right. That halacha is like Reb Meir. In order to be yotzei, we read the entire Megillah. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it says you could read from Mordechai's introduction, but we mentioned this before. The whole Megillah has to be written. It means you can't read from a Megillah that only starts from Mordechai's introduction. It has to be entirely written in front of you. Now let's move on to a few more halachot about the Megillah, and we'll finish off. Megillah nekret sefer. The Megillah is called a sefer. It's called a scroll, which refers to like a sefer Torah. V'nekret igeret, and it's also called a letter. Now a letter implies more of a mundane type of thing, not a holy like a sefer Torah. So a nekret sefer, it's called a book like a sefer Torah, which is she'im tafra b'chutei pishtan psula, that if it's stitched with flax, with pieces of flax, psula, it's considered invalid. Why? Because a sefer Torah can't be stitched with flax. Sefer Torah needs to be stitched with gidin, with sinews. The sinews of the cow, actually, they use to stitch the sefer Torah. So a Megillah cannot be stitched with that either. The nekret igeret, but it's also called a letter, she'imi til bash losha chutei gidin kshera. That as long as you put even 3 of these gidin, these sinews, or veins of the cow, you're yotzei the mitzvah. You don't need to have more than that. That would be effective. Seems like a Sefer Torah requires more coverage, but Igeret is you don't need as much as a Sefer Torah. Amar Rav Nachman says, but they should be spaced out in thirds. Now what that means is, when you stitch the Megillah with these sinews, you should space it out equally where the sinews go. They were used to connect the pages. We use it, so what we do is, we make a break at the bottom, then we stitch an area that's equivalent to that with these sinews, make a similar break, stitch the next area, similar break, third area, and then similar break till the top. Means it should be incrementally separated. So Rashi explains that idea. Okay. Now, moving on in the same topic here about the way the Megillah is to be made up. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, HaKoreh b'Megillah k'tuva ben ha'ktuvim lo yatsa. If you read a Megillah that is wrapped together with the other ktuvim, meaning it's not an independent scroll, but rather it's wrapped together with other Kitvei HaKodesh, meaning, let's say it's like the 5 Megillot together. It's not distinct. It's not its own book. You're not Yotzei. Now we're going to see the reason you're not Yotzei, Rashi explains here, is because you need to do Pirsum Nisa. Part of Pirsum Nisa is everybody sees you're holding a Megillah. Otherwise, it just looks like you're learning the Megillah, like you're learning the Parsha. It's not a kiyum of Pirsum Nisa to spread the miracle. Rava explains, this would only be an issue if it's not a little bit smaller or larger than the other ktuvim. Meaning, if you have all the other pieces of that scroll that are a certain width or a certain height, and this one is higher or lower, it's more distinct in a certain way, everybody sees clearly you're reading Megillah for the mitzvah, and Pirsumei Nisa occurs, that would still be acceptable. That would be acceptable. Levi Bar Shmuel Havakakari Kamed Rabbi Yehuda Megillah. Levi Bar Shmuel was reading the Megillah in front of Rabbi Yehuda, turning to Yetet Amud Bet, Haktuva ben Haktuvim, but it was wrapped together with other scrolls. So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yehuda said to him, Harei Amra Koreh Megillah Haktuva ben Haktuvim lo yatzai. He said, you're not Yotzei, because we know if it's wrapped together with other scrolls, so that's not considered a Pirsumei Nisa, so you're not Yotzei. we want to go ahead a little bit, a few more minutes, just finish up this point. Amar Reb Chia bar Abba Amar Reb Yochanan Akoreb Megillah Aktuva Ben Aktuvim. You know, let's do it to the Mishnah. For 5 more minutes, I guess we might as well. Amar Reb Chia bar Abba Amar Reb Yochanan Akoreb Megillah Aktuva Ben Aktuvim. If somebody reads the Megillah that is written amongst the other scrolls, lo yatsa, you're not yotze. Now, the implication of this statement, as Rabbi Yochanan was saying it,
This is the same, no?
right? It seems to be the same psak. The implication is that it's halacha leMoshe miSinai. That's what it sounded like he was saying. I mean, this is like our tradition, halacha leMoshe miSinai. But umachu la'amocha literally means he hit it on its head, meaning he hit it on, so as to say is, no, it's not exactly like that, which is bitzibur shanu. As Rashi explains, that's only an issue in tzibur, because really it's not halacha leMoshe miSinai, this is how Rashi explains it. The issue is rabbinic. I mean, the rabbi said, if you read it bitzibur, you won't spread the knowledge of the miracle that's going on. But if you're reading it by yourself, it's not an issue necessarily, and you could be yotzei the mitzvah that way. So Rashi explains, meaning it wasn't halacha leMoshe miSinai, but rather it was it's a rabbinic issue, and that's only an issue bitzibur, but not in public, not in private. 1 second. 1 second. Sorry, let me correct myself. Rashi learns that in the next point, but what the point the Gemara is correcting over here, that Reb Chia bar Abba was correcting is that it's not necessarily an issue. Meaning the halacha is only an issue b'tzibur. It's only an issue in public, but in private, where you don't have the issue of persumei nisa, because people, you could know yourself, it wouldn't be an issue to read a Megillah that's wrapped with others. Now this one is the idea that I was just saying. So let's see. V'amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan shiur atfar halacha leMoshe miSinai. This is really that emphasis. Leaving over some space at the top and bottom of a Sefer Torah is halacha leMoshe miSinai. Now, what does that mean? It means when you would stitch up the Sefer Torah, you leave over a little bit of space on the top and bottom that's not stitched. So first he said, Reb Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan said it was halacha leMoshe miSinai. Means this was taught to Moshe on Sinai. But then he corrected himself. He corrected himself, and he says, "Velo amru ela kedei shelo yikra." No, really, it's rabbinic, and they only said that so it shouldn't tear. Meaning, the point is there was a logical reason they said leave over the top and bottom not stitched, because when you're tightening the Sefer Torah, you're tightening it together. You don't want to tighten it too tight that it rips. So if you leave over a little bit top and bottom, you'll see that it starts to pull, and then you'll stop. But really, this isn't halacha leMoshe miSinai. It's just a din d'Rabbanan. Now, the final point here, it focuses on, it's the second last point actually. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself in a very overt way to Moshe Rabbeinu and Eliyahu Hanavi. 2 different stories actually. One we had recently in the Parshiyot, where he told them to go into a cave, and then he passed by. This is obviously very deep, and there's a lot going on, but Reb Chia bar Abba says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ilmali nishtayir b'ma'ara she'amad ba Moshe ve'Eliyahu k'malei nekev machat sidkit. If there would have been left in that cave that Moshe and Eliyahu were standing, the area of a needle's prick, meaning even a small amount, lo hayu yecholin la'amod mipnei ha'ora. They would not have been able to withstand the radiance or the light of Hashem. Shene'amar, like the pasuk says in Kitisa, ki lo yir'ani ha'adam b'chai. No man can see me and live, meaning no one can withstand that, which is actually why HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, you could see my back, which Rashi learns is kesher shel tefillin, whatever that means exactly, but you can't see my front, because no one can see the front of me, whatever that means exactly. It's symbolic. What's that?
If he's alive.
In order to live, exactly, it's impossible. Final point here. In Parashat Ekev, the pasuk tells us the following: and on them all of the things that Hashem spoke to you on the mountain. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu, what were all these things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu taught Moshe on Har Sinai? Melamed, it teaches us, Sher'eu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe, Hashem taught Moshe on Sinai all the following. Diktukei Torah, he taught him Diktukei Torah. So Rashi explains the analysis of Torah. It refers to the inclusionary and exclusionary statements. Like, for example, Rashi says, gam. The word gam or the word et in the Torah usually are expounded to mean inclusions, ribuyim. And the word ach or rak are used to be exclusions. So Hashem taught all of that to Moshe. Vidiktuke Sofrim, as well as the Diktuke Sofrim. Rashi explains it was the later people who make diukim in the Mishnayot, from the teachings of the original. It sounds like the Gemara, meaning the analysis into the Mishnayot and things like that. That was also all taught to Moshe. Umasha Sofrim Atidin Lechadesh, and this is unbelievable, is even what the rabbis in the future would create novel ideas. Umayni, what does that refer to? Mikra Megillah. Means even Mikra Megillah was taught to Moshe on Sinai. To understand exactly what that means, actually I spoke about it last night, because there's a Gemara that tells us in Shavuot, Lametet Amud Aleph, that Moshe warned the Jews in Arvot Moab when they were at the border of Eretz Yisrael. He reintroduced them to the treaty, to the covenant. They made a pact with Hashem, an agreement, and he also made them swear off on the Megillah. But the Megillah was 1,000 years later, so you have to know exactly what the pshat in that is, but that would seem to go hand in hand with this Gemara. All right, we'll stop at the Mishnah. We'll pick up at about halfway down. We'll pick up this tomorrow. Tonight, 7:55, God willing. Zat Hashem.
Thank you.
You know what?